any event that you go to where there are native plants, it's Rick donating them for the cause. It's a great fellow organizing the environmental and natural history education programs, continuation of legacy programs, keeping the education alive. I'll let him talk to you a little bit about that. But to introduce the rest of our panel on native plants, please welcome Rick Barboza.
Aloha, everybody. Sorry, this is my first time doing this, so... Oh, cool. How are you? Hope you guys handpicked this out in the forest. Get it out of there. I guess, well, today is all about native plants and why people need to love them and kind of why people should, spend the time to take the time to learn more about them. Start everybody off with a quiz, and everybody loves quizzes, but just by a show of hands, okay? And I want everybody to participate. We really need this. Which of the plants on this list are native? So starting with A, who thinks A is the native plant? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. How about B? Who thinks B is the native plant? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, cool. And feel free to raise your hand more than once. Who thinks C is the native plant? Loa'e. Oh, plenty of people. Right on. Okay. What about D? Kikania. Kikania? What's that? Makes an orange ball lay. You see it all over the Big Island. Kind of hollow, papery lay. Kikania? Nobody? One. All right, cool. Well, the answer is E. None of the above. In fact, Ohai ali'i is an introduced plant that was named after a native plant called Ohai. And I'll show a slide of it later. The reason why Ohai ali'i gets its name is because when the first plants were introduced, they had red and yellow flowers, which are the color of ali'i. Hence the name Ohai ali'i. B, Pua Keni Keni. Everybody loves Pua Keni Keni. Beautiful Hawaiian name. Hawaiian name means 10-cent flower. So Hawaii's never had 10 cents. C, Loa'e. That's the big one. A Loa'e fern. You go to Mary Monarch and everybody at Mary Monarch is covered in Loa'e. Loa'e fern was introduced to Hawaii, or the first time it was ever seen in Hawaii was on the island of Maui in 1919. Hasn't even been 100 years that Loa'e's been here. And there's a lot of old olelo that talk about Loa'e, but there's actually another fern called pe'ahi that's what they're probably talking about. There's no direct reference that the Loa'e in all of those oli and hula are actually talking about even a fern. Loa'e could also mean the lau of a'e. There's a lot of native trees called a'e. So it could be the leaves of a'e. But there is another native fern called pe'ahi, which the fronds look like kukui nut leaves. A lot different than what we think of Loa'e today. But it has that similar fragrance, that similar growth characteristic. And Loa'e is supposedly the secondary name of pe'ahi. So when Loa'e was introduced, it was given that name. And Kikania, yeah, it's a highly invasive plant. I tried to throw people off and say, yeah, it's all over the Big Island. But yeah, it's all over the Big Island because it's an invasive species. This is also a list of plants that a lot of times we may associate with Hawaii that aren't. Kiawe trees, all gingers. There's a little asterisk because we do have avapuhi and olena, which are in the ginger family that could be considered Hawaiian, but they're not native. They're Polynesian introductions. Koa haole or haole koa. Mauna Loa vine that makes Mauna Loa leis, highly invasive. Kuhio vines all over the freeways. Lilikoi, other passion fruits, really bad vines for trees, for the forest, for the ecosystem. Guava, strawberry guava, highly invasive plants. Hula girl hibiscus. A lot of times when you look in some of the magazines in Waikiki that depict our state flower, a lot of times they'll show the hula girl hibiscus. No, sorry, it's ma'ohauhele. Yes?
Hey, Rick, what's the yellow hibiscus planted all around the state capitol?
I believe it's yellow. I believe it's hula girl hibiscus. And Ka'u orange. Ka'u orange is just oranges grown in Ka'u. Just like Kona coffee. It's just coffee grown in Kona. So what's real funny is when people grow coffee on Oahu and call it Kona coffee. Yeah, it's a whole nother list of plants that a lot of times are associated with being Hawaiian. And when I say Hawaiian, none of these plants are native, nor are they Polynesian introduced. These are all recently introduced plants. So mangoes, pineapples, proteas, anthuriums, tiare gardenias, crown flowers, which is Queen Liliuokalani's favorite flower. Bamboo, we do have a Hawaiian bamboo that's Polynesian introduced, but most of the bamboo that you see out here, not the Hawaiian bamboo. Wood rose, I have a mango tree on my property that is completely covered in wood rose. So it's one invasive taking out another non-native, so I don't know what to do, I'm in a dilemma. Royal palms, lanternillima, octopus trees, highly invasive plants, beach heliotropes, macadamia nuts, Kona coffee, lokelani, it's a pink rose, even the green rose is not. So all of these things. So now that I've depressed everybody, what is Hawaiian? What makes a plant Hawaiian? And what we, excuse me, we call a plant Hawaiian if it's native or Polynesian introduced. And a native plant is classified as one that got here without the help of man. And usually by the 3 W's. First W is waves, floating over here on ocean currents. An example would be the beach naupaka. Wind blown over on yes, question.
Okay, what about things like mucuna, which travel by ocean?
Mucuna is native. Mucuna gigantea is native. Yeah, yeah. Hawaiian name is Ka'e'e'e. So, wind would be an example of how ohia and ferns got here, blown over jet streams.
What was the example for the waves?
Naupaka, like beach naupaka. There's a lot more of examples, but that's just one. You've ever seen the beach naupaka fruit? They're kind of spongy and they float. Wings, seeds or spores that can get stuck in the feathers or sometimes in the mud of migratory birds that come here. And an example would be a kulikuli. So now that we know what a native plant is, we can further break down the term native into indigenous and endemic. And this is kind of important. A lot of times people think indigenous plants, that's native, but we actually have more representation of endemic plants here in Hawaii than indigenous plants. And indigenous means that it's a plant that's native to Hawaii, but also native to different parts of the world. So for example, the naupaka. That plant is native to Hawaii, but it's also native to pretty much every other Pacific island. Over time, that plant can kind of evolve and change to better fit the environment that it's living in, to better suit the type of pollinators that exist. As it evolves and morphs to kind of, now it no longer reproduces with the original ancestor that came here, that plant would be considered a unique species and therefore classified as endemic, meaning that it's found here in Hawaii and nowhere else in the world. And of the, depending on which book you read, 1,400 native plants that we have here in Hawaii, 90% are endemic, only found here and nowhere else in the world. And Polynesian plants we also consider Hawaiian because they're culturally very important, enough so that when the Polynesians settled here, they brought it with them. So an example would be Kaulo, Kukui, our state tree, which I have issues with that, by the way, but we'll talk about that later. Breadfruit, and then also chickens, pigs, dogs, stuff that the animals that the Hawaiians brought with them. Rats. They brought rats with them. That was on there too. So why do we need to care about this? What's the importance of native plants? Well, this is a list of plant species and their current status. Well, current back in 2008. The first one, completely extinct. That's the number of species that, since we've been recording native plants here in Hawaii, within the last 200 years or so, have gone extinct. So 111 plants have gone extinct within the last 200 or so years. How many plants that are extinct in the wild but exist in cultivation? There's actually 5 different species that only exist in cultivation and are now classified as extinct in the wild. How many species have one individual remaining in the wild? Well, there's 14, and so on and so forth. So things need to be done. We're the endangered species capital of the world. and based on our land size. So something needs to be done. Who are we to mess with evolution? These islands have been here for approximately 70 million years. And within the last 200 years, we've had 110 plants go extinct. Not only that, we've introduced more than 10,000 species of plants here. But Rick, native plants are so ugly, and they're so weedy. You know how many times people tell me this? And people that tell me this, then it's like, wow, you guys must know everything about native plants in order to make that sort of judgment. That's not really a fair thing to say. Or is it? I don't know. Let's see. So what are we comparing that statement to? What are we comparing native plants, native Hawaiian plants to? Plants found from the entire world? Because really, we can grow every single plant that's found on the entire planet here on Hawaii. We have pretty much every ecological zone to do that. Well, if we do that, the land mass of the world is 57 million square miles. The land mass of Hawaii, 6,000. That's not a fair judgment to say. We're really small compared to the entire world. And when we talk about biodiversity, here in Hawaii, like I said, we have approximately 1,400 plants that are native to Hawaii. Well, Hawaii, like I said, the entire state of Hawaii makes up 6,000 square miles. When we think about biodiversity and the Amazon rainforest, the Amazon is 3 million square miles. All of these rainforests people associate with biodiversity. Well, the Southeast Asian rainforest is 1 million square miles. And the Congo is 500,000 square miles. Here in Hawaii, our biological diversity, the majority of it took place in our lowland dry forest. This is how much lowland dry forest we have. Historically, 3,500 square miles of lowland dry forest. This is where all of our species diversity took place. Today, we have less than 175 square miles of lowland dry forest. And none of it is considered pristine. There's a lot of non-native plants introduced into those areas. Big Island and Maui primarily, but even Oahu, the entire Ewa Plains, the plateau between the Ko'olaus and the Wai'anais, that was all of our dry forest. That's where it used to be. So how many plants? Like I said, we have 1,400 plants that are native to Hawaii. Well, there's about 300,000 plants that are native or that are found throughout the world. And then nowadays, when we look around us, we see over 10,000 plants that were recently introduced here. So is it really fair to say that native plants are ugly when you're comparing it to the world? If you took the landmass of Hawaii and put it on any spot in the world, I'm pretty sure that little tiny spot in the Congo will have weedy and ugly looking plants too, as well as really nice ones. You be the judge. Can anybody look at these pictures and say these plants are ugly? Every single one of these plants are endemic to Hawaii and various parts of Hawaii. These plants are also very beautiful, but like the sign says, most of them are extinct. This one on the bottom, the alula or olulu, there's one plant left in the wild on the northwestern coast of Kauai, the Napali coast.
What's the one on
The top right is a hibiscus tree that and I say Waimanalo because the Ahupua'a of Waimanalo used to extend from its current boundaries, but actually used to go all the way around to Kuli'o'o. And the last place that this place was seen was, that plant was seen was in Kuli'o'o and Cocoa Head. It's actually a related species to that plant, because the last time that plant was seen on Oahu was in 1888. And that was, the genus of that plant is Coquia. And the one that was found on Oahu was Coquia lanceolata. That picture right there is of Coquia drynareoides, which is on the Big Island. But on the Big Island, that species, there's only 2 plants remaining in the wild, maybe. So, and then the one on the bottom left is another type of hibiscus that co-evolved with our native forest birds. Because if you look at the shape of the flower, it's curved, just like our forest birds' bills. And that plant went extinct in the 90s.